June 6, 1944. As the pre-dawn gloom reluctantly yielded to the nascent light over the Norman countryside, a Waco CG-4A glider, its silhouette stark against the brightening sky, severed its connection to the tow plane at an altitude of 800 feet. Within its Spartan interior, a Willis MB Jeep, a formidable assemblage of 2,450 pounds of steel, rubber, and mechanical ingenuity, lay firmly secured to the floor. The glider's pilot, a figure of intense concentration, grappled with the control yoke, guiding the craft as verdant hedgerows surged upwards to meet them with alarming speed. The inevitable impact was swift and brutal. The fuselage crumpled like an accordion, its fabric rending violently, and the wooden spars exploded into a myriad of sharp splinters. As the chaotic cloud of dust began to dissipate, an almost miraculous event unfolded. The Jeep's engine, against all conceivable odds, sputtered to life. The resilient vehicle, its suspension systems remarkably unscathed, and its steering responding with perfect fidelity, then proceeded to extricate itself from the mangled wreckage, poised to transport Allied troops deeper into the mainland, while German forces were still struggling to comprehend the unfolding invasion. This extraordinary outcome was not merely a stroke of fortune. It was the direct result of an engineering solution that the United States Army Air Forces had, just 18 months prior, derided as an egregious squandering of vital wartime resources. On that very morning, stretching across the vast expanse of the English Channel, an astonishing tally of over 1,400 Jeeps endured similarly violent and abrupt insertions into occupied France. Their glider carriers met various catastrophic fates. Some plunged headlong into solid stone walls, others belly-flopped with a resounding splash into inundated fields, and many cartwheeled uncontrollably across pastoral landscapes. These aircraft were, by design, considered expendable, conceived for a singular, one-way mission. However, the Jeeps themselves were absolutely indispensable. They were engineered with the imperative to survive the very crashes that annihilated the gliders transporting them. Conventional military wisdom unequivocally declared this feat impossible. The prevailing logic dictated that one simply could not package a vehicle to endure the immense, destructive forces capable of tearing an aircraft asunder. The intricate mathematical calculations did not align with such a possibility, and the requisite materials were presumed to be utterly unavailable. And yet, defying all expert predictions, there they were, these indomitable vehicles, rolling purposefully through the quaint Norman villages, the smoldering remnants of their delivery craft burning forlornly in their wake. The visionary individual responsible for this pivotal capability was not a decorated general, nor was he a seasoned military engineer boasting decades of ordnance expertise. He was, in fact, a civilian whom the Army had unceremoniously dismissed in 1942, a consultant they had labeled a crackpot, who seemingly lacked a fundamental understanding of real-world operational constraints. His name was Palmer Coslet Putnam, and his unwavering preoccupation with a problem that no one else seemed willing or able to solve ultimately revolutionized the landscape of airborne warfare. Yet, what truly distinguishes this narrative from the myriad of conventional tales of military innovation is a crucial detail. Putnam's design was so profoundly radical, so fundamentally antithetical to established military doctrine, that even after its resounding success in rigorous testing, the Quartermaster Corps made concerted efforts to suppress it. Their concerns, it must be acknowledged, were not entirely unfounded. They grappled with legitimate anxieties regarding material costs during a period of stringent wartime rationing, potential production bottlenecks, and the complexities of field maintenance. However, an undeniable undercurrent was also institutional pride, the bitter pill of admitting that an external, unconventional mind had resolved a challenge that their own highly trained engineers had found insurmountable. That particular truth proved exceptionally difficult to swallow. This compelling account chronicles how an urgent, overriding sense of desperation ultimately triumphed over ingrained ego, illustrating how one man's seemingly extravagant and wasteful design became the decisive factor between the fluidity of Allied mobility and the crippling inertia of Allied stagnation during the critical hours immediately following D-Day. It delves into the often overlooked realm of hidden logistics, the unsung engineering marvels that rarely feature in dramatic combat footage, but which fundamentally determine whether armies can advance triumphantly or become hopelessly mired. The story commences with an exploration of why, in the year 1942, virtually every expert within the U.S. military establishment firmly believed that the successful airdropping of functional jeeps was nothing more than a fantastical delusion. Palmer Coslet Putnam, with his unassuming demeanor, hardly fit the conventional image of a man destined to fundamentally transform military logistics. Born in 1900 into a distinguished publishing family in the vibrant metropolis of New York, his intellectual pursuits in the 1930s had led him to chase ambitious wind energy projects across the picturesque landscapes of Vermont. There, he meticulously designed experimental turbines, creations that established utility companies, with polite but firm dismissals, consistently overlooked. Armed with an engineering degree from the prestigious Massachusetts Institute of Technology, he possessed an exceptionally restless and inquisitive mind, coupled with a well-earned reputation for approaching intractable problems from refreshingly unconventional and often unorthodox perspectives. As the ominous clouds of war gathered and then broke over Europe, Putnam perceived a unique opportunity to make a meaningful contribution to the burgeoning conflict. In early 1941, he proactively approached the War Department, submitting detailed proposals outlining innovative airborne supply systems. The Army, at that time overwhelmed by an influx of established defense contractors and self-proclaimed visionaries, promptly relegated his correspondence to a filing cabinet labeled "Unsolicited Civilian Correspondence." However, the devastating attack on Pearl Harbor dramatically altered the military's previously dismissive attitude toward external ideas. Suddenly, the Army Air Forces had committed to an unprecedented and massive expansion of its airborne divisions, elite paratroopers whose mission it would be to seize crucial bridges and strategic crossroads far in advance of the main ground forces. Yet, a critical and glaring flaw existed within this doctrine. Paratroopers, by their very nature, were light infantry. They jumped into combat equipped with rifles, light machine guns, and perhaps a few mortars, conspicuously lacking vehicles, artillery, or any means of sustained heavy firepower. Once they had landed, they were essentially isolated and vulnerable until larger ground units could successfully link up with them. The German Wehrmacht had learned this brutal lesson through bitter experience during their invasion of Crete in May 1941, where their paratroopers sustained devastating casualties before vital reinforcements could arrive. American military planners, acutely aware of this historical precedent, were unequivocally determined not to repeat such a catastrophic mistake. The seemingly obvious solution to this tactical quandary appeared to be gliders. These engineless aircraft possessed the unique capability of being towed behind larger transport planes, subsequently released over designated landing zones, and thereby delivering heavier, more substantial equipment. The British military was already actively experimenting with the formidable Horsa glider, a craft capable of transporting either a jeep or a light artillery piece. In response, the Americans developed their own variant, the Waco CG-4A, designed with the impressive capacity to haul up to 3,750 pounds of cargo. Problem solved, or so it seemed, at least on the surface. However, the reality proved far more complex. Military engineers swiftly discovered that the combination of gliders and jeeps was, in practice, a recipe for unmitigated catastrophe. A standard jeep, fully fueled and equipped, weighed approximately 2,450 pounds. During the inherently violent process of a glider landing, which was, in essence, a controlled crash, the vehicle transformed into an immensely destructive battering ram. If secured using conventional methods, the sheer impact forces either violently ripped the jeep from its moorings, sending it careening uncontrollably through the glider's fuselage, or the extreme deceleration shock severely bent its frame, shattered its axles, and reduced its engine block to a mangled mass of scrap metal. Recognizing the severity of the challenge, the Quartermaster Corps assigned their most capable engineers to tackle this vexing problem in mid-1942. They experimented with reinforced tie-downs, but the jeeps continued to suffer catastrophic damage. They attempted to cushion the landing gear's contact points, yet the vehicle frame still twisted beyond repair. They even tried reducing fuel loads in an effort to decrease overall weight, but the jeeps consistently arrived as unusable junk. After a frustrating 6 months of repeated failures, the official recommendation was to completely abandon the concept of jeep delivery by glider and instead focus on smaller, lighter cargo that could more reliably withstand rough landings. However, airborne commanders, acutely aware of their troops' desperate need for mobility and firepower, vehemently rejected this recommendation, pushing back with considerable force. Without mobile firepower and dedicated transportation, they argued, their paratroopers would face an inevitable massacre. This impasse created a complete stalemate. Such was the dire situation when Palmer Putnam made his appearance at Wright Field, Ohio, in December 1942. He had learned through unofficial channels that the military was grappling with a severe vehicle delivery problem, and was convinced he possessed a viable solution. The engineering officers, who initially met with him, were deeply skeptical from the outset. Putnam was not proposing mere improvements to tie-downs or stronger glider frames. His radical idea involved constructing a substantial wooden crate around each jeep, a specialized container meticulously designed to absorb the immense impact forces through a process of controlled, sacrificial destruction. The quartermaster officers, performing rapid mental calculations, immediately grasped the implications. His proposed design would necessitate an astonishing 200 board feet of plywood per jeep, in addition to steel cable and specialized assembly procedures. Multiplying this by the thousands of jeeps required for the war effort, they quickly realized they were discussing materials that could otherwise be used to construct vital barracks, essential landing craft, or critical aircraft components. In the midst of the most severe material shortages in American history, Putnam was advocating for a crate that, in terms of material cost, approached the value of the very vehicle it was designed to protect. They politely thanked him for his time and expeditiously sent him home. Officially, Palmer Putnam's groundbreaking proposal was formally rejected on January 8, 1943. The Army, it declared, would find another solution. Except, in reality, there was no other viable solution, and everyone within the command structure implicitly understood this grim truth. To fully grasp why Putnam's idea initially appeared utterly insane, one must comprehend the fundamental physics governing glider crashes. A fully loaded Waco CG-4A glider approached its designated landing zone at an approximate speed of 70 miles per hour, descending at a dangerously steep angle due to the absence of an engine to modulate its descent. Pilots ideally aim for expansive, open fields, but in the chaotic and unpredictable conditions of combat, rife with hedgerows, cratered terrain, and the constant threat of enemy fire, they were often compelled to accept whatever ground presented itself. The instant the glider's skids made contact with the earth, the deceleration was not a gradual process, it was violently abrupt. In a mere second, the vehicle transitioned from highway speed to a complete standstill. The forces involved were not the gentle G-forces experienced during a controlled car braking. Rather, they were immense collision forces, the kind capable of crumpling even robust steel. For the Jeep secured within, this extreme scenario created multiple critical points of failure. Firstly, there was the inexorable force of inertia. Newton's first law of motion, unconcerned with military necessity, dictated that the 2,450-pound vehicle would stubbornly attempt to continue moving forward at 70 miles per hour even after the glider had ceased its motion. Standard cargo straps, even those of military-grade quality rated for aircraft use, invariably snapped under this immense load or tore their anchor points clean out of the wooden glider floor. Engineers painstakingly calculated that keeping a Jeep stationary during such an impact demanded restraints capable of withstanding over 15,000 pounds of instantaneous force. Constructing tie-downs of such formidable strength would necessitate reinforcing the entire glider cargo bay, which in turn would add prohibitive weight, thereby significantly reducing the crucial payload capacity and ultimately defeating the very purpose of the exercise. The second formidable challenge arose even if one could miraculously prevent the Jeep from shifting. The sheer deceleration itself was enough to utterly destroy the vehicle. One could imagine bolting a Jeep to an immovable concrete wall, and then ramming that wall into the Jeep at 70 miles per hour. This analogy functionally encapsulates what transpired during a severe glider landing. The Jeep's frame flexed far beyond its design tolerance limits. Suspension components, meticulously engineered to absorb bumps and minor jumps, not instantaneous stops, sheared violently from their mounting points. The engine, typically resting on rubber mounts to mitigate vibration during normal operation, transformed into a 400-pound wrecking ball that tore loose from its fastenings and proceeded to demolish everything in its immediate vicinity. Transmissions cracked, axles bent irreparably, and wheels broke off their hubs, rendering the vehicle utterly useless. The third crucial issue stemmed from the inherently unpredictable nature of the landing itself. A theoretically perfect glider approach onto perfectly flat terrain might generate survivable forces, but combat landings were anything but perfect. Gliders frequently struck unforeseen ditches and nosed over, violently slamming their precious cargo forward into the cockpit bulkhead. They often caught treacherous crosswinds and rolled sideways, tumbling the cargo like clothes in a dryer. They struck various obstacles, sturdy trees, robust fence posts, abandoned farm equipment, and disintegrated in an asymmetrical, devastating manner. During extensive training exercises conducted throughout North Carolina in 1942, the 82nd Airborne Division recorded a dismal Jeep survival rate of less than 30%. A staggering 70% of the vehicles delivered by glider were too severely damaged to be driven. Some were complete write-offs, while others required many hours of intensive field repairs, a luxury that the brutal conditions of combat simply would not permit. The prevailing circumstances simply would not permit it. The collective wisdom of the engineering community was unequivocal. Fashioning a restraint system capable of mitigating every conceivable crash scenario was an insurmountable task. The sheer multitude of variables, coupled with the utterly extreme forces involved, rendered such an endeavor futile. What the military truly required was a method to render the Jeep itself impervious to the ravages of impact, an ingenious way to somehow detach the vehicle from the violent maelstrom unfolding around it. Yet, the question loomed, how? One could not simply encase a Jeep in protective bubble wrap, nor could one surround it with sufficient cushioning to make a meaningful difference without inflating the package to an unmanageable size for the glider's confined cargo bay. Recalibrating the Jeep's fundamental design was equally out of the question. Willis Overland was already operating at peak production capacity, and any significant structural modifications would inevitably bring manufacturing to a grinding halt for many months. Several innovative engineers put forth an alternative proposition: the fabrication of specialized airborne Jeeps, outfitted with substantially reinforced frames and ruggedized components. This concept, however, quickly fizzled into oblivion. The projected financial outlay would have been astronomical, the production timeline utterly unacceptable, and critically, even these strengthened Jeeps would still succumb to catastrophic damage during the most severe impacts. Others pondered the viability of parachute delivery, envisioning Jeeps descending on colossal cargo chutes from low altitudes. Initial test drops offered a glimmer of hope until these valuable vehicles began to land haphazardly in treacherous rivers, entangled in dense tree canopies, or directly amidst enemy positions, rendering their retrieval impossible. Gliders, at the very least, offered the distinct advantage of placing the crucial vehicles precisely where the ground troops required them. By the nascent months of 1943, this perplexing deadlock had escalated into a full-blown crisis. Operation Husky, the pivotal invasion of Sicily, was firmly penciled in for July. Elite airborne divisions were slated to spearhead this critical assault, and their desperate need for robust vehicle support was becoming increasingly urgent. Commanders found themselves confronting the grim prospect of dispatching paratroopers into the crucible of combat burdened by the same debilitating mobility disadvantage that had inflicted such grievous losses upon the Germans during the Battle of Crete. The Quartermaster Corps, having exhausted every conceivable avenue of inquiry, was utterly devoid of fresh ideas, a moment of deep frustration that unexpectedly prompted someone to recall the civilian engineer from Vermont, whose unconventional crate design had once been dismissed as extravagantly wasteful. Palmer Putnam's ingenious container, however, bore little resemblance to a conventional crate in any customary sense. Instead, it was an intricate machine of controlled destruction, meticulously engineered to dismantle itself in a precisely orchestrated sequence. When military engineers finally scrutinized his detailed blueprints in February 1943, albeit with considerable reluctance and under significant pressure from impatient airborne commanders, they discovered a design that flagrantly contravened every established tenet of cargo packaging they had meticulously acquired. Standard military containers were traditionally constructed to safeguard their contents through sheer inherent strength, relying on rigid walls engineered to steadfastly resist deformation. Putnam's radical design, conversely, embraced the antithesis of this philosophy. It was deliberately conceived to collapse, to crumple, and to absorb the brutal energy of impact by artfully disintegrating in a rigorously controlled and progressive manner. The foundational concept underlying this groundbreaking design drew inspiration from a principle that would not attain widespread acceptance within mainstream automotive safety doctrine for another 2 decades: the revolutionary idea of crumple zones. The crate's basic structural integrity was derived from plywood panels, precisely 3/4 of an inch in thickness, meticulously arranged in an intricate honeycomb pattern around the Jeep. Crucially, these were not monolithic, unyielding walls. Putnam had ingeniously engineered them with deliberate points of structural weakness, incorporating scored sections specifically designed to buckle and yield under predefined load thresholds. One might vividly imagine it as a sophisticated wooden accordion, precisely calibrated to compress in distinct, sequential stages. The outermost panels were programmed to fail first, gracefully absorbing the initial, jarring shock of impact. As these outer layers collapsed inward, they seamlessly triggered the catastrophic, yet controlled, failure of the secondary panels, which in turn absorbed the subsequent wave of kinetic energy. By the time the destructive forces finally reached the Jeep itself, their potency had been meticulously dissipated through multiple, successive layers of progressive, sacrificial destruction. In essence, the crate was meticulously designed to perish so that the invaluable vehicle nestled within could ultimately endure and live. Robust steel cables were intricately woven through the entire structure in a complex web pattern, providing vital connections between the floor and the roof panels. These cables were specifically calibrated with a precise tension rating. During routine handling and transportation, they remained sufficiently loose to permit a slight, necessary degree of structural flex. However, during the sudden, violent jolt of a crash, they instantly became taut, effectively acting as crucial energy limiters, meticulously preventing the crate from collapsing with excessive rapidity. If the structure were to fail too swiftly, the entirety of the impact energy would instantaneously assault the Jeep, rendering the protection no different from a conventional, unprotected crash. Conversely, if it were to fail too slowly, the crate would not compress adequately before the glider inevitably struck secondary obstacles, negating its protective effect. Putnam, with his extraordinary foresight, had meticulously calculated the exact cable gauge and tension required to precisely spread the deceleration forces over an approximate duration of 0.2 of a second. This minute fraction of time proved to be the pivotal difference between a merely bent axle and a fully functional, operational vehicle. The floor assembly, a testament to Putnam's comprehensive approach, exhibited an equally sophisticated design. Rather than being rigidly mounted directly to the glider deck, the entire crate rested upon an ingenious system of wooden skids, interconnected by specialized shear pins. These pins were meticulously engineered to snap at precisely predetermined force levels, a design feature that permitted the entire packaged unit to slide forward several crucial feet during impact, even as the glider structure around it came to an abrupt halt. This controlled, forward-sliding motion served to further extend the critical deceleration time, effectively mitigating the immediate shock. One might conceive of this mechanism as conceptually akin to an aircraft carrier's highly effective arresting cable system, with the notable distinction that instead of gradually bringing a high-speed aircraft to a halt, Putnam was meticulously decelerating a Jeep in a controlled manner, while everything else in its immediate environment was stopping almost instantaneously. Intriguingly, the Jeep itself, once ensconced within the crate, was not secured in the conventional, rigid fashion. Instead, Putnam devised a bespoke suspension system of its own. Strategically placed rubber blocks positioned at specific, critical points on the vehicle's frame, held securely in place by wooden brackets precisely designed to break away under conditions of extreme load. The Jeep, in essence, effectively floated within the crate's interior, meticulously cushioned on all sides. During the traumatic event of a crash, the outer crate collapsed inward, but simultaneously, the resilient rubber blocks compressed, introducing yet another vital layer of energy absorption. The profound brilliance of the design resided in its meticulous sequencing. Outer panels failed first, followed by the stretching of the steel cables, the sliding of the floor skids, the fracturing of the inner wooden brackets, and finally, the compression of the rubber blocks, all transpiring in a perfectly synchronized cascade that meticulously transformed one singular, massive impact into a judicious series of smaller, progressively survivable impacts. The Quartermaster Corps engineers tasked with scrutinizing this novel design readily apprehended its profound theoretical elegance. However, they were equally cognizant of its daunting practical complexities, which bordered on a logistical nightmare. Each individual crate demanded an astonishing 220 board feet of aircraft-grade plywood, a material so stringently rationed during wartime that numerous furniture manufacturers had been compelled to cease operations entirely to preserve precious supply. The inclusion of the steel cable contributed an additional 40 pounds to the weight of each crate. Furthermore, the specialized rubber blocks directly competed for resources with the critically important production of vehicle tires. The intricate assembly process necessitated the expertise of highly trained carpenters, working with unwavering adherence to precise specifications, leaving absolutely no margin for error in either panel thickness or cable tension. And here lay the aspect that particularly exasperated the meticulous military logistics officers. The crate was fundamentally designed for single use. Following a solitary landing, it was irrevocably reduced to mere scrap wood. There was no possibility of salvaging its components, no opportunity for its reuse. Every precious Jeep successfully delivered invariably meant another crate utterly destroyed. When Putnam eventually presented his comprehensive cost analysis, the figures were undeniably damning. Each individual crate was projected to cost approximately $180 to construct. The Jeep nestled within it, by comparison, cost $738. This meant an astonishing 24% was added to the vehicle's inherent price solely for its packaging. Extrapolating this figure across the 10,000 Jeeps the Army ambitiously planned to deliver by glider over the ensuing year, one arrived at a staggering sum of $1.8 million dedicated exclusively to packaging, an amount equivalent to roughly $31 million in today's currency, all for wooden boxes destined to be unceremoniously abandoned in the fields of France. The Quartermaster General, in a moment of exasperated candor, famously dubbed it the most exorbitantly priced kindling in the annals of military history. Nevertheless, airborne commanders, grimly contemplating the harrowing casualty projections for operations undertaken without adequate vehicle support, unequivocally articulated their unwavering stance: either authorize the necessary expenditure or face the unavoidable cancellation of crucial airborne missions. The weighty decision consequently ascended the chain of command, ultimately reaching the War Department. In March 1943, defying every ingrained bureaucratic instinct that vehemently screamed against such a proposition, they reluctantly authorized the commencement of field testing. At the sprawling expanse of Wright Field, Ohio, in April 1943, the eagerly anticipated testing program commenced, not with high-stakes glider flights, but with comparatively straightforward drop tests conducted from towering wooden structures. Engineers, exercising prudent caution, were understandably disinclined to jeopardize expensive gliders and the lives of highly trained pilots on an entirely unproven concept. They meticulously erected a 15-foot platform, carefully loaded a crated Jeep onto a specialized release mechanism, and then allowed the inexorable force of gravity to accomplish its work. The inaugural drop employed a prototype crate, with Putnam himself personally supervising its assembly, having traveled from Vermont at his own expense, utterly determined to decisively prove his skeptics wrong. The Jeep impacted the ground with a resounding thud. The crate, in a spectacular display of its engineered purpose, exploded into a myriad of splinters precisely as designed. And when the lingering debris was finally cleared, the vehicle, astonishingly, roared to life on the very first crank. Engineers meticulously scrutinized the frame with precision levels and measuring tools. There was no discernible distortion, and the suspension system remained remarkably intact. One officer present, later penning his observations in a formal report, confessed that he had fully anticipated an unmitigated disaster, and instead bore witness to something that profoundly defied common sense. With newfound confidence, they incrementally increased the drop height to 20 feet, then to 25 feet. Each successive test involved freshly built crates and pristine Jeeps. The consistently positive results held firm, unequivocally demonstrating the crate's remarkable protective capabilities. Yet, the scrupulous quartermaster observers remained unconvinced by the limited scope of the tower drops. They rightly contended that genuine glider impacts encompassed a crucial element of horizontal velocity, not merely vertical force. Such real-world scenarios involved uncontrolled sliding, violent tumbling, and the application of profoundly asymmetric loads. The tower tests, while successful, had only conclusively demonstrated the crate's ability to withstand straight-down impacts. Combat landings, they knew, would rarely, if ever, be so straightforward. Consequently, in May, the testing regimen advanced to its next, more perilous phase, actual glider crashes. This is where the endeavor became both financially exorbitant and inherently dangerous. The established test protocol was nothing short of brutal. A meticulously crated Jeep would be loaded into the cavernous belly of a CG-4A glider, which would then be towed to an altitude of 800 feet. Upon reaching the designated landing zone, the glider would be released, and the pilot would be instructed to bring it down with deliberate, aggressive force. These were not the gentle, precision approaches pilots would typically attempt under ideal, controlled conditions. These were meticulously orchestrated worst-case scenarios. Pilots received explicit instructions to simulate the chaotic realities of combat landings, steep, precipitous approaches, high-speed touchdowns that jarred the aircraft, and maneuvers over deliberately rough, unforgiving terrain. Wright Field had painstakingly prepared several distinct landing zones, each presenting varying and challenging conditions: freshly plowed earth, densely packed clay, and a particularly treacherous zone deliberately littered with logs to realistically simulate a formidable hedge barrier. Over an intense period of 6 weeks, a total of 23 glider crash tests were meticulously conducted, each involving a crated Jeep. The initial 5 tests proceeded with astonishing flawlessness. Gliders disintegrated spectacularly, crates shattered precisely as intended, and, to the amazement of observers, the Jeeps consistently drove away under their own power. The 6th test, however, introduced a significant complication. The pilot, in a critical misjudgment of his approach, came in too fast, resulting in the glider violently cartwheeling after its initial impact with the ground. The crate and the Jeep, still tethered within its remnants, tumbled twice, end over end, in a terrifying display of uncontrolled motion. Observers, bracing themselves for the inevitable, fully anticipated total destruction. When the swirling dust finally settled, they discovered the Jeep lying precariously on its side, still securely strapped within the fragmented remains of the crate. They quickly righted the vehicle, meticulously checked for any damage, and found only a bent front bumper and a single cracked headlight lens. The engine, defying all expectations, started on command. It drove. Even a complete, violent glider tumble had failed to exceed the remarkable protective capacity of Putnam's ingenious crate. Test number 12 provided the most dramatic affirmation of the crate's remarkable protective capabilities. As the glider approached its landing zone, a sudden crosswind unexpectedly caught its right wing, causing it to dip sharply and strike the ground with tremendous force. The impact initiated a catastrophic sequence. The fuselage spun a full 180 degrees, then tore violently apart at its midsection, and the tail separated completely from the main body. The forward portion, which contained the crucial Jeep, continued its momentum, plowing another 50 feet through the terrain, shedding a chaotic trail of torn fabric and splintered wooden ribs. The entire scene resembled a violent detonation, with debris scattered extensively across a 100-yard radius. Recovery teams faced a daunting task, requiring a full 20 minutes simply to pinpoint the Jeep within the mangled wreckage. To their astonishment, they discovered it almost perfectly intact, nestled amidst the utterly destroyed remnants of its protective crate, itself buried under a deluge of shattered wood and ripped canvas. A mere 15 minutes later, after minimal effort, the vehicle roared to life. The test pilot, who had miraculously emerged from the horrific crash with only minor contusions, stood beside the now running Jeep, his face a mixture of relief and incredulous laughter. However, the rigorous testing regimen was not without its moments of challenge. Not every trial concluded flawlessly. Test number 17, for instance, exposed a critical design flaw within the floor skid mechanism. During its landing, the glider encountered an unforeseen depression in the field. Instead of smoothly gliding over the uneven surface, the skids became abruptly lodged, and the resulting sudden deceleration severely bent the Jeep's rear axle. Recognizing the gravity of this issue, Putnam dedicated 3 intense days to meticulously redesigning the skid attachment points, ingeniously incorporating beveled edges. This modification was specifically engineered to prevent any future jamming, even when encountering highly irregular terrain. The improved design was subsequently integrated into Test 20, where the previously identified problem completely vanished, validating Putnam's swift and effective solution. By the close of June, the comprehensive test program had proudly achieved an impressive 87% survival rate. This significant figure indicated that 87% of the Jeeps, meticulously encased within Putnam's specialized crates, emerged from even the most severe crashes in fully drivable condition, a stark and overwhelming improvement compared to the mere 30% survival rate previously observed with conventional packaging methods. The Quartermaster Corps could no longer credibly dispute the irrefutable evidence. Putnam's innovative crate unequivocally performed as intended. Yet, the acceptance of the design's efficacy did not, regrettably, extend to the acceptance or acknowledgement of Putnam himself. In the official reports subsequently submitted to the War Department, the groundbreaking innovation was conspicuously attributed to the collective efforts of Quartermaster Corps engineers in collaboration with civilian consultants, with Palmer Putnam's name notably omitted from any credit. The deeply entrenched issue of institutional pride persisted stubbornly. Senior military officers, while undoubtedly recognizing that this ingenious design held the potential to both preserve countless lives and decisively influence the outcome of battles, were demonstrably unwilling to bestow credit upon an outsider who had so clearly demonstrated the shortcomings of their own engineering staff. Consequently, lucrative production contracts were swiftly dispatched to lumber mills situated in Oregon and Michigan. By July of 1943, these factories were diligently churning out the specialized crates at an impressive rate of 200 units per week. Comprehensive training manuals were meticulously developed to instruct assembly crews on the precise and exacting specifications required for construction. Meanwhile, Palmer Putnam returned to his home in Vermont, his monumental contribution effectively classified, his pivotal role strategically minimized, and his truly revolutionary design poised on the precipice of its ultimate trial, the crucible of actual combat. Operation Overlord. The monumental invasion of Normandy stands unparalleled as the largest amphibious assault ever recorded in human history. However, the initial landings on the heavily fortified beaches represented merely the commencement of a far more intricate and perilous endeavor. Allied strategic planners possessed a clear understanding that German armored divisions would rapidly converge to contain the nascent beachhead. Should these formidable German forces succeed in trapping the invasion troops within a confined coastal strip, the entire operation risked collapsing into an unimaginable bloodbath. Therefore, the imperative of achieving swift inland penetration was paramount. Within mere hours of disembarking, Allied forces were tasked with pushing beyond the immediate beach defenses, seizing crucial crossroads, effectively severing German reinforcement routes, and establishing robust defensive perimeters deep within occupied territory. Paratroopers were designated to spearhead this critical inland thrust, executing their perilous jumps behind enemy lines in the pre-dawn hours. Yet, the hard-won lessons gleaned from previous airborne operations in Sicily, Salerno, and Italy had unequivocally demonstrated a crucial truth. Paratroopers operating without vital vehicle support were, in essence, static and vulnerable targets. For the pivotal D-Day operations, the venerable 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions submitted an unprecedented request for 1,400 jeeps, a staggering number for airborne delivery. Each of these versatile vehicles was earmarked to transport a machine gun crew, a mortar team, or to function as an essential ammunition resupply asset. Furthermore, the divisions also sought the airborne delivery of 75mm pack howitzers, formidable anti-tank guns, and critical medical supplies, all of which were utterly reliant on having vehicles to facilitate their movement. Absent these vital jeeps, the paratroopers would be compelled to consolidate defensively around their designated drop zones, awaiting the arrival of ground forces, a delay that could potentially span several days. Conversely, with the jeeps at their disposal, they possessed the capacity to launch aggressive strikes against German positions, establish disruptive roadblocks many miles inland, and sow widespread chaos throughout the German rear areas. The entire overarching operational concept fundamentally hinged upon the question of whether Palmer-Putnam's meticulously engineered crates would function effectively under the brutal realities of actual combat conditions, at an immense scale, and directly under enemy fire. The extensive loading operations commenced with precision on June 5, unfolding simultaneously across numerous airfields scattered throughout southern England. Each specialized crate had been carefully pre-assembled at forward staging areas, with jeeps driven inside and meticulously secured according to the exact specifications laid out by Putnam. Ground crews then employed a combination of powerful winches and robust loading ramps to skillfully maneuver the crated jeeps into the waiting CG-4A gliders. This intricate process typically consumed approximately 45 minutes per glider. With hundreds of gliders being loaded concurrently, the entire operation mirrored the synchronized efficiency of a vast factory floor, with crews executing their tasks with rehearsed precision. They diligently checked cable tensions, scrupulously verified shear pin installations, and confirmed that critical rubber mounting blocks had not deteriorated during storage. A single, solitary error in this complex assembly sequence carried the dire potential for a destroyed jeep and, consequently, stranded and vulnerable troops. The inaugural wave of gliders detached from their tow planes high above Normandy at precisely 0330 hours on June 6, a critical 3 hours before the amphibious beach landings commenced. They descended in successive waves, typically comprising 20 or 30 aircraft at a time, released from their parent tow planes at altitudes ranging between 600 and 1,000 feet. What the controlled training exercises at Wright Field could never adequately replicate was the sheer, unbridled pandemonium of actual combat landings. Intense anti-aircraft fire mercilessly ripped through the glider formations, with searing tracer rounds illuminating the pre-dawn darkness. Some pilots, in desperate attempts to evade the lethal barrage, executed violent evasive maneuvers, throwing their gliders into steep dives and sharp turns that subjected their precious cargo to forces far exceeding the original design specifications. Others discovered their designated landing zones obscured by dense smoke or already pockmarked with craters from relentless naval bombardment. They were forced to land wherever they could find a patch of ground, in fields deliberately flooded by German defensive measures, across pastures crisscrossed with menacing anti-glider poles ominously nicknamed Rommel's asparagus, or even in the small gardens behind quaint Norman farmhouses. Glider 17, belonging to the 325th Glider Infantry Regiment, slammed into a formidable stone wall at full, unmitigated speed. The nose of the aircraft crumpled catastrophically, the cockpit imploded, and both pilots tragically perished instantly. The fuselage then accordion folded backward with horrifying force, and the tail section tore away completely, leaving a scene of utter devastation. When troops eventually reached the wreck 20 minutes later, with the grim task of recovering the Jeep, they fully anticipated finding nothing but twisted scrap metal. However, the specialized crate, true to its innovative design, had disintegrated precisely as intended, its wooden panel shattered and scattered across a 50-foot expanse of field. Amidst this extensive debris, the Jeep sat remarkably intact, its wheels mired in mud, but fundamentally sound in its structure. They swiftly started its engine, backed it out of the wreckage, promptly mounted a .30 caliber machine gun, and had the vehicle fully engaged in combat within the hour, a testament to the crate's unprecedented resilience. Another notable incident involved Glider 31 from the storied 101st Airborne Division, which executed an emergency landing in a heavily flooded zone near St. Miraglise. The pilot, faced with an array of worse alternatives, had no viable choice. The glider remarkably skipped across the standing water like a stone, only to collide with a submerged fence post and nose violently into the thick mud. Water immediately inundated the cargo bay. Recovery crews bravely waded through waist-deep water, fully expecting to discover a hopelessly drowned engine. While Putnam's ingenious crate design had not specifically accounted for water landings, a fortunate consequence of its elevated floor skids was that the Jeep had been kept sufficiently high for its engine intake to remain dry. They successfully towed the vehicle to higher, dry ground with the assistance of another Jeep, drained its carburetor, and to their immense relief, it sprang to life and ran. It is important to acknowledge that not every delivery was ultimately successful. Some gliders experienced such profoundly catastrophic crashes that even the exceptional engineering of Putnam's design proved insufficient to preserve the cargo. Instances occurred where gliders struck trees and disintegrated midair before even reaching the ground. Others landed directly in German minefields, detonating ordnance against which the protective crate offered no defense. Furthermore, a number of gliders tragically caught fire after being struck by incendiary rounds during their perilous approach. However, these catastrophic failures constituted less than 15% of the total deliveries. The overwhelming majority, a remarkable 85%, successfully delivered functional vehicles directly into the hands of airborne troops within mere hours of their landing. By 0900 hours on June 6, an astonishing total of over 2,100 Jeeps were fully operational behind German lines. These versatile vehicles immediately proved invaluable. They towed anti-tank guns into strategic positions, establishing critical ambushes for advancing German armor. They efficiently transported the wounded to vital aid stations, and they effectively supplied ammunition to isolated units, ensuring their continued fighting capability. In essence, they transformed scattered paratroopers into a cohesive and formidable mobile striking force. German commanders, in their subsequent after-action reports, frequently recorded their profound confusion. They had anticipated encountering lightly armed infantry that could be easily contained and systematically destroyed. Instead, they were confronted with highly mechanized units possessing unexpected firepower and unparalleled mobility, units that seemed to materialize impossibly deep behind their lines, and with bewildering speed. The standard German counter-response to airborne landings, dispatching armored divisions to crush the drop zones, repeatedly encountered fierce, jeep-mounted ambushes many miles from their expected positions. The ambitious operational tempo that Allied planners had boldly gambled upon, a strategy entirely dependent on the successful airborne delivery of vehicles, had unequivocally materialized. Palmer Putnam, far away in Vermont, remained unaware of his design's extraordinary success until he eventually read about it in newspapers weeks after the fact. The brutal conflict concluded in Europe in May 1945, and in the Pacific that August. As the vast military apparatus began its demobilization, millions of pages of classified documents were systematically transferred into archival storage, a significant portion of them bearing stamps such as restricted or confidential. Among these meticulously preserved documents were the detailed Wright Field Test reports, the comprehensive D-Day after-action assessments, and critical correspondence outlining Palmer Putnam's invaluable contributions to airborne logistics. Yet, the official history of airborne operations, published by the War Department in 1947, dedicated only 3 pages to the subject of glider-delivered vehicles. It briefly mentioned innovative packaging solutions developed by Quartermaster Corps engineers, and included a concise technical description of shock-absorbing crates. Conspicuously, Palmer Putnam's name appeared nowhere within the entire document. For the purposes of institutional credit, the groundbreaking innovation was officially attributed solely to the military establishment. The contributions made often found themselves attributed solely to the military. This practice was not uncommon within the annals of post-war military historical accounts. The armed forces, steeped in a venerable tradition, consistently sought to diminish the significance of civilian involvement, thereby upholding an unwavering image of martial self-sufficiency. The prevailing narrative asserted that combat engineers alone constructed crucial bridges, military scientists exclusively pioneered radar technology, and Army cryptographers single-handedly deciphered enemy codes. This was the perception the general populace embraced, and in numerous instances, such portrayals were indeed accurate. Yet, the deliberate obscuring of Palmer Putnam's pivotal role transcended mere bureaucratic credit appropriation. A profound sense of institutional embarrassment underpinned this particular omission. The Quartermaster Corps had initially scorned his ingenious design, branding it extravagant and dismissing him as an impractical civilian inventor. Only when dire necessity compelled them to trial his invention, and it performed with astounding efficacy, was the institutional reaction one not of gratitude, but of quiet resentment, culminating in a concerted campaign to reframe the true origins of the innovation. Putnam himself displayed no inclination to contend for public recognition. Following the cessation of hostilities, he quietly redirected his efforts back to his pioneering wind energy projects, delving into hydroelectric systems, and publishing scholarly articles on renewable energy sources that proved remarkably prescient, anticipating future advancements by many decades. During the 1950s, his seminal book on wind power generation emerged as a cornerstone text within the burgeoning field. When occasionally queried by professional colleagues about his wartime engagement, he would acknowledge consulting for the military, but invariably withheld any specific details. Whether his silence stemmed from signed non-disclosure agreements or a personal preference for discretion remains ambiguous in the extant historical records. Nevertheless, the visionary individual who had masterminded a solution to one of the war's most pressing logistical challenges gradually receded into obscurity, even as his brilliant solution seamlessly integrated into standard operational procedures. The ingenious crate design itself, however, did not vanish from military application. Logistics planners within the armed forces swiftly recognized its intrinsic value, even if they steadfastly refrained from crediting its original creator. Throughout the latter half of the 1940s and extending into the Korean War era, various adaptations of Putnam's innovative shock-absorbing container began to appear prominently in official supply manuals. Key elements, such as the distinctive honeycomb panel structure, the groundbreaking principle of progressive collapse, and the meticulously engineered cable-limited energy dissipation mechanisms all became indispensable standard features in airborne cargo packaging systems. By the 1960s, the design had undergone such extensive refinement that its original form was barely discernible. Contemporary materials supplanted the initial plywood and steel cable components. Engineers incorporated crushable aluminum sections, advanced foam energy absorbers, and sophisticated pneumatic cushions, yet the fundamental conceptual underpinning endured, safeguarding valuable cargo through the deliberate, controlled destruction of the container itself in a predetermined sequence. The advent of the Freedom of Information Act and the subsequent waves of declassification in the 1970s proved to be a turning point. Diligent researchers, meticulously sifting through newly released World War II documents housed at the National Archives, fortuitously stumbled upon the crucial Wright field test reports. It was within obscure footnotes and detailed appendices that Palmer Putnam's name unexpectedly surfaced. A dedicated graduate student, immersed in crafting a dissertation on wartime logistics innovations, painstakingly unearthed the original rejection letters from the Quartermaster Corps, located Putnam's initial design proposals, and meticulously reconstructed the entire chronological sequence of events. In 1978, a concise academic article finally appeared in a respected military history journal, a full 35 years after the fact, definitively establishing Putnam's vital connection to the revolutionary airborne Jeep delivery system. Tragically, Putnam had passed away 2 years prior to this belated revelation. He never learned that historians had finally brought his long-buried contribution to light. This exposure precipitated a modest reevaluation within specialized military engineering circles. Subsequent articles in Army logistics publications began to concede that the long-held standard narrative of World War II logistics had indeed been incomplete, acknowledging that civilian ingenuity had played a far more substantial role than previously acknowledged. However, this historical rectification reached only a circumscribed audience of specialists, historians, and engineers engaged in the study of legacy systems. The broader public remained largely unaware of this compelling narrative. World War II documentaries continued to fixate on dramatic battles and prominent generals, largely overlooking the profound impact of packaging engineers. The prevailing heroism narrative simply lacked a suitable space for a sagacious wind energy consultant from Vermont who had ingeniously devised wooden boxes. What truly endured and propagated was the technology itself, a silent testament to its creator's foresight. Contemporary airdrop containers, routinely employed by the United States military, directly traced their conceptual lineage back to Putnam's foundational principles. The sophisticated container delivery system, first introduced in the 1980s, expertly utilizes layered energy absorption techniques to safeguard cargo during precarious low-altitude parachute drops. Similarly, the Army's low-velocity airdrop system, developed throughout the 1990s, masterfully employs controlled structural collapse to gently cushion heavy equipment upon impact. Even civilian applications have judiciously adopted this revolutionary concept, evident in automotive crumple zones designed for passenger safety, the specialized packaging for delicate electronic devices, and rigorously crash-tested shipping containers. The radical idea that Palmer Putnam had so steadfastly championed against considerable institutional resistance, the counterintuitive notion that true protection arises from strategic destruction rather than unyielding strength, has since become a cornerstone principle across a multitude of industries. In the year 2003, a modest historical marker was erected at a specific Vermont wind farm, the very site where Putnam had conducted his pioneering turbine experiments during the 1930s. The commemorative plaque duly notes his significant contributions to renewable energy and includes a solitary sentence referencing his World War II endeavors. Developed innovative cargo packaging systems for military airborne operations. Conspicuously absent were any specific details, no elucidation of what this accomplishment entailed or why it held such profound importance, merely a fleeting footnote, a poignant reflection of how institutional memory had ultimately reduced his extraordinary impact. The countless soldiers who, for decades, drove their jeeps out of the wreckage of gliders or from modern airdrop systems, remained blissfully unaware of the individual who had made their survival and the successful delivery of their vehicles possible. Even the generations of engineers who have meticulously built upon his foundational principles for over 8 decades rarely comprehend the full origin story. And herein lies the ultimate irony. The most profoundly successful military innovations are frequently those that seamlessly recede into the background, becoming so universally standard and indispensable that their origins are no longer questioned or even remembered. Let us rapidly advance to Bagram Airfield, Afghanistan, in the year 2010. A colossal C-17 Globemaster, its powerful engines roaring, gracefully lifts off the runway at dusk, its vast cargo bay meticulously loaded with what the Air Force formally designates as a Type 5 airdrop platform, essentially, a robust wooden pallet securely cradling a Humvee, meticulously enveloped in layers of advanced protective packaging. The formidable aircraft ascends to a precise altitude of 200 feet, meticulously levels its flight, and the skilled loadmaster initiates the critical release sequence. Parachutes deploy with precision, the heavy platform smoothly exits the cargo bay, and a mere 30 seconds later, it impacts a designated desert landing zone at a controlled velocity of 24 feet per second. The platform strikes the arid ground, the multi-layered packaging systematically crushes in controlled stages, and the valuable vehicle encapsulated within effectively absorbs impact forces that would otherwise warp an unprotected frame into irreparable scrap metal. Soldiers swiftly reach the drop zone approximately 15 minutes later, efficiently cut away the now destroyed packaging, and promptly drive the fully operational Humvee directly to a forward operating base. Palmer Putnam had passed away 34 years prior to this specific airdrop, yet his profound engineering DNA is intrinsically woven into every intricate layer of that sophisticated protective system. The modern container delivery system represents the culmination of Putnam's original wooden crate concept, meticulously evolved through 7 decades of relentless advancements in material science. Instead of rudimentary plywood panels, contemporary systems now employ aerospace-grade honeycomb aluminum, engineered to collapse at precisely predetermined crush loads. In place of conventional steel cables, they utilize advanced aramid fiber webbing, designed with meticulously calculated tensile limits. Rather than simple rubber blocks, these systems incorporate high-performance closed-cell foam, precisely rated for specific energy absorption capabilities per cubic inch. However, strip away these cutting-edge modern materials, and one invariably discovers the identical underlying architectural genius. Outer layers, meticulously designed to fail first. Progressive energy dissipation achieved through carefully orchestrated destruction. sophisticated suspension systems that effectively decouple the precious cargo from direct impact forces, and robust floor assemblies ingeniously designed to slide and absorb energy rather than catastrophically transferring shock to the payload. The Joint Precision Airdrop System, JPADS, formally introduced in 2004, further augmented cargo parachutes with advanced GPS guidance capabilities, enabling pinpoint delivery of vital supplies to troops in remote locations inaccessible by ground convoy. This sophisticated system possesses the remarkable ability to precisely place 5 tons of supplies within a mere 150 feet of a designated target, even when released from an altitude of 25,000 feet. However, such incredible accuracy would be rendered meaningless if the cargo arrived damaged or destroyed. Consequently, every JPADS container intrinsically relies on direct descendants of Putnam's groundbreaking collapse-in-sequence design. During extensive operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, the system successfully delivered over 5 million pounds of cargo with an exceptional 98% serviceability rate, meaning an overwhelming majority of 98% of all dropped items arrived completely intact and fully usable. This remarkable statistic stands as the clearest and most compelling validation of Putnam's fundamental core insight. If one engineers the destruction precisely and correctly, nothing truly critical will ultimately be destroyed. Civilian applications have embraced and extended this transformative principle even further. Modern automotive design mandates the inclusion of crumple zones, meticulously engineered to absorb collision energy, while simultaneously preserving the rigid integrity of passenger compartments, a philosophy that precisely mirrors Putnam's innovative approach to safeguarding Jeeps within collapsing crates. The ubiquitous iPhone residing in your pocket is encased in packaging designed with remarkably similar staged collapse structures, specialized foam inserts that compress sequentially to meticulously protect the delicate glass and intricate electronics during the rigors of shipping impacts. Amazon's widely recognized frustration-free packaging initiative similarly leverages the very same energy dissipation mathematics. The pervasive ubiquity of this concept has rendered it virtually invisible to the average consumer. Most individuals do not consciously ponder the reasons why fragile items miraculously survive shipping. They simply do not question the intricate engineering ingenuity that underpins its seamless functionality. Disaster relief operations powerfully underscore the technology's current, far-reaching impact. When devastating earthquakes or catastrophic hurricanes sever crucial ground access routes, airdrop supplies frequently become the sole viable option for delivering humanitarian aid. The United Nations and various national militaries meticulously maintain extensive stockpiles of airdrop-ready containers, specifically engineered to withstand rough landings in unprepared and often challenging zones. Essential medical equipment, vital water purification systems, and critical emergency shelters are all carefully packaged in direct descendants of Putnam's pioneering World War II crates. Following the catastrophic 2010 Haiti earthquake, U.S. Air Force C-17s conducted over 200 critical airdrops into the devastated city of Port-au-Prince, utilizing advanced GPS-guided containers. The sophisticated packaging that meticulously protected those life-saving supplies, the very systems that enabled clean water and essential antibiotics to reach desperate survivors, meticulously adhered to the fundamental design principles first drafted on a visionary Vermont engineer's drawing board in 1942. The irony, however, lies in the fact that Putnam himself never extended the application of his ingenious solution beyond its immediate military utility during wartime. His approach was pragmatic: identify a challenge, devise a resolution, and then transition to the subsequent intellectual pursuit. His endeavors in the post-war period were dedicated to wind energy, specifically forecasting how turbine technology might one day generate substantial electrical output from sustainable sources. That pioneering work, much like his innovative cargo crate design, was considerably ahead of its epoch and largely overlooked throughout his lifetime. Yet, in the contemporary landscape, wind farms contribute over 10% of the United States' electricity, and Putnam's early research papers are frequently referenced in foundational turbine engineering texts. He was a visionary consistently operating 3 decades beyond his contemporaries, persistently disregarded, and invariably proving correct only after the window for meaningful personal recognition had firmly closed. In due course, the military did eventually recognize his contribution, albeit in a formal, institutional manner. In 1991, the Army Quartermaster Museum, situated at Fort Lee, Virginia, established a modest display dedicated to innovations in airborne logistics. Within one showcase, visitors can observe a miniature replica of a CG-4A glider, featuring a cross-sectional representation of a crated Jeep nestled inside. The informational panel attributes the design's development to Palmer C. Putnam, a civilian engineer. It stands as a subtle gesture, a type of official annotation that rectifies the annals of history without publicizing the rectification widely. Patrons who pause to read the plaque uncover a piece of knowledge most people will never acquire: that one of World War II's pivotal logistical advancements originated not from service strategists or armament manufacturers, but from a wind energy consultant who comprehended that sometimes, to safeguard a precious asset, one must permit the surrounding elements to yield in precisely the correct manner. That very principle, initially derided as inefficient and unworkable in 1942, is now so integral to modern engineering practices that its contentious origins have faded from collective memory. And perhaps that constitutes his enduring heritage, not personal renown, nor explicit commendation, but an idea so profoundly successful it assimilates into the collective consciousness without trace of its origin.